Welcome to Real Leaders with Roshini, the podcast with real talk, real questions, real insight, and we hope real inspiration. For real. Today, my guest is Rolf Nordstrom. He's the CEO of Great Plains Institute, and we're chatting at Capitol Grill in downtown Minneapolis, which is no stranger to real leaders. Rolf, I'm so excited to talk with you today because there are hot topics in your zones of expertise. Things like high-performing buildings, hydrogen cell technology, energy, the environment. I mean, these are not necessarily sexy topics, but they're getting sexier by the day.
Yes. Well, first, Roshini, thanks so much for inviting me to join you for this. Most people don't give much thought to energy, and yet I think people would be hard-pressed to name a human activity that doesn't require energy, right? You couldn't refrigerate medicine, you couldn't get to work, you couldn't go up an elevator if you live in a tall building. I mean, people who remember Hurricane Sandy in New York, when they had pictures of New York, much of went dark. I mean, modern life comes to a standstill without energy, which is really why we focus on it.
And Rolf, we're hearing that that's right now what world leaders fear, is that other countries could attack infrastructure that would bring down and make cities and countries go dark.
It's true. Yeah, it's in fact, as the electric grid is changing and modernizing, that is becoming a growing concern, because just like every other part of our life, people can think about the electric system going through the same evolution that we went through in computers. So, computers, at least back when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, computers took up entire floors of buildings, right? And now we all carry a little computer around in our pockets called a smartphone. The electric system is going through a similar change, right? Where we used to power the electric system with big, huge centralized plants, and we still do. But increasingly, the energy technologies that are being developed today, like wind and solar and energy storage, are at the smaller scale, kind of closer to where the energy is being used, and the whole electric grid is becoming computerized, digitized. So as that happens, it's both a great benefit to society, but it's also creating new vulnerabilities as we attach more things to the electric grid that can speak to everything else. It's these days called the Internet of Things, where pretty much everything that you like could be your refrigerator, could be your thermostat in your home, your television. Pretty soon, just about everything will be able to talk, if you will, to everything else. And that's going to make some great things possible, but it also creates some vulnerabilities.
All right, let's talk about the possibilities first.
Yeah.
When you say all of these different Internet of Things and how the energy and the environment and all those areas play into it, it makes me think that there are a lot of jobs here. So maybe there's hope, because I know Minnesota, other parts of the country, dealing with labor shortages right now. But it sounds like there could be a lot of new jobs in your industry.
For sure. I mean, just to back up, so the mission of the Great Plains Institute is nothing short of transforming the energy system for both economic and environmental benefits. So we take that economic piece very seriously. We also take the climate science seriously. So we think we need to decarbonize, get the greenhouse gas emissions out of the out of the energy system. But as we do that, we think it actually means basically a new industrial revolution, and not just for Minnesota, but for the whole world, because we are, and it's happening really quite rapidly, we're essentially reinventing how we are going to power our lives and our economy, increasingly with clean, still very affordable energy. And that, as you say, is going to mean lots of jobs. In fact, renewable energy is now the fastest growing job sector, both in Minnesota and nationally. Actually, the top two fastest growing job types are wind turbine technician and solar power installer.
Well, it's too bad I have really no scientific bone in my body, because it sounds like those could be some lucrative careers.
Mm-hmm. If this goes south, Roshini, I think you should really seriously consider.
I need real leaders with Roshini to really succeed, so I can kind of stay in my own zone.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You say, too, there are challenges and there might be some gaps or some vulnerabilities. What are the key vulnerabilities? And let's talk about real people, because after all, this is real leaders. Let's talk about real people and what they should be worried about here.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, we take the climate issue very seriously. I know that has been sort of divisive. I would just say to people, you should check out the science yourself if you doubt whether or not climate change is real. I think the essence of the climate problem is that we have disrupted the natural carbon cycle on Earth. And I know that may sound kind of wonky, but if you think about the way the Earth evolved, there was this sort of dynamic equilibrium in the carbon cycle. And to give you just a small window into it, so you and I, every time we exhale, we breathe out carbon dioxide. And plants, right, all plants, basically breathe in carbon dioxide and they produce oxygen, which we need. So isn't that a lovely...
Isn't it just a nice circle?
Nice circle. And that elegant, and there's more to it than that, but that gives you a sense of what that carbon cycle looks like on the planet. And really, since the Industrial Revolution, when we discovered coal and oil and natural gas, all of which have been really terrific for modern life, also turns out they have lots and lots of carbon in them. And that carbon was all nicely tucked underground until we found it. And now in the space, sort of the geologic blink of an eye, in very short time frame since the Industrial Revolution, we've taken all that carbon back up and put it back into circulation. And you don't have to be like a physics major to know that if you add all that carbon back to this otherwise mostly closed system, right, it's going to have an effect. And the reason they used to call it, and still do, the greenhouse effect, people know what a greenhouse is, and they know that glass on the greenhouse traps the sun's heat. Well, the carbon dioxide that we're busy releasing because of all these carbon-based fuels we're using is having the same effect. It's sort of thickening the glass, if you will, or the blanket around the planet. And if you trap more heat, it's going to have an effect. And we see it now, and it's sort of like climate chaos. It's not just warming. I mean, we've had some very bitter cold weather, right? So there's a difference between climate and weather, for one.
And that's a big thing, because
Huge.
That's very political right
It
now,
is.
and various politicians get bashed
Right.
for not knowing the difference.
Yeah, so people say, oh, well, it's cold or it's snowed, so there can't be global warming. I think it's just more complicated than that. So I think we think climate is something that everybody should be not just worried about, but also willing to embrace. In true American fashion, right, we have never shied away from a challenge. And we see this at GPI, we see the climate problem, yes, as something to solve, but actually as just the mother of all opportunities.
Wow, I love that.
For innovation and reinvention, job creation.
This is big.
I think it's going to lead to a healthier, cleaner, and frankly more peaceful world in the end.
I love it. I love world peace.
Yeah.
I
Who's not
pray
for
for
world peace?
All right, tell me about the roadmap for decarbonization in the mid-continent. What is that? It's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. Like decarbonate what? So I mentioned, as talking about the climate issue, right? It's not the only greenhouse gas, but a big problem is that we're putting too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
And everyone should agree on that, right? Is that disputed?
It's just a fact.
It's a fact.
That part's just a fact. We're adding more carbon dioxide, billions of tons, that weren't there before. They measure it in parts per million. So when we started the Industrial Revolution, we had 280 parts per million, and they now measure this all over the world. The measuring station in Mauna Loa, Hawaii, now has us well over 400 parts per million. That may not seem like a big jump, but humans have not seen the world, the climate that we're headed for.
Wow.
So one of the principal problems is that we're adding all that carbon dioxide, and so we need to decarbonize, that's where that word comes from, the way we produce energy. So we might still end up using fossil fuels in the future, but if we do, we need to capture the carbon dioxide that those fuels emit
to be able to use.
When we burn them.
How far away
and otherwise
are we?
We need efficiency and wind and solar.
Right, and that's what I was going to ask about. How far away are we really from being able to rely on wind and solar much more than the carbon?
Than fossil fuels?
Fossil fuels.
I don't think we're far away at all. There's enormous momentum. So already today, wind and solar, wind is competitive with conventional fossil fuels almost every place in the country.
Well, what do you have to say to the people who say, but it's not always windy or it's not always sunny?
Well, that's true. It isn't, which is why, so there are three answers to that. because that is right. It's not always windy and it's not always sunny. But energy storage is following the same trajectory that wind and solar did. That is, it's plummeting in price and getting better in technology. So if we have energy storage, we will have ways of storing that wind and solar for when we need it later, when it's not windy and sunny. That's one. Two, and I know this is kind of wonky too, but we actually need to build out a more robust electric transmission line system, right? This is the electric lines that knit the whole system together. Right now, it's sort of, there are zones that we don't have transmission lines that connect the whole country well together. It's kind of
piecemeal.
Chopped up, piecemeal. Mm-hmm. And so we need a transmission system that allows you to move that wind and solar power across a larger footprint on the theory that it's windy or sunny somewhere, right? So even if it's not in your location, you could move power from where it is windy somewhere. So this
takes international, well, at first national, but international cooperation also.
It does. I mean, electric grids in particular are national, it's almost by definition. I mean, so we're not moving electricity from one country to another. But when it comes to other forms of energy, yes. I mean, this quest toward transforming the energy system is not something that just Minnesota or just the U.S. is trying to accomplish. It's really a global endeavor.
Well, and so that's why, Rolf, it's good you're on it, because you've worked on this very issue and issues surrounding energy in the state of Minnesota. You've worked around the country, around the globe, in Belgium for one. So before we kind of get a little lighter, because this is heavy stuff, and I do want to get a little lighter, but it's really interesting and important information. What's the one thing you want Real Leaders with Roshini listeners to take away from our conversation today when it comes to the environment, and maybe not just what they can do, but what's in store for them?
Yeah. Well, I think the one thing, first of all, we don't think of this as just an environmental issue, and we actually don't even think of ourselves as an environmental organization per se. I think the one thing that I would want leaders to know, and people who listen to this show to know, is that this is totally doable to transform an energy system, and it's already happening probably faster than most people imagine.
Well, that's hopeful.
It is hopeful. I mean, we just recently put out a study actually with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. This is focused just on Minnesota now, but that Minnesota could meet probably up to 70% of its electricity needs with renewables, answering your earlier question.
Really? Love that.
And that kind of result is true across the mid-continent. You asked me about this decarbonization roadmap. We've done two, one for the electric sector and one on electrifying transportation, so electric vehicles. And in the electric sector one, we concluded through modeling and with involving a lot of different stakeholders, right? So this isn't environmental groups. This is like utilities and businesses and elected leaders and so on, getting together and talking about this stuff together. That study and that modeling showed that across the whole mid-continent part of the country, we could decarbonize the electric system 80 to 95%.
Wow.
With existing technology. So I would want people to come away knowing this is both doable and it's going to be beneficial.
So the sky is not literally falling yet.
No, it isn't. But we need to get busy.
All right, Rolf, we're at Capitol Grill in downtown Minneapolis. I happen to be a martini drinker myself.
As am I.
Okay.
I like gin, slightly dirty.
Oh, interesting. So I was going to ask you, if you could be a drink or a spirit or whatever, a wine, is there something you would be?
Oh, dear. Well, I think I might either be a martini or a Manhattan.
And why a Manhattan?
It's sentimental reasons. My dad doesn't really drink much anymore, but he used to love Manhattans, and I'm the youngest of 5 in my family, and I have this. You know how those olfactory memories are sometimes the strongest, like you get a smell, or so just the smell of a Manhattan makes me think of my dad.
Wow, I love that.
Plus, I enjoy them myself.
Well, that's helpful. That's also helpful. That's a bonus, right?
It is
that's
a bonus. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Rolf Nordstrom, a pleasure to chat with you today.
Likewise.
I know we'll chat again.
I hope so.
Because the sky is not falling, but there's much more to do when it comes to energy.
There is.
All right. Well, folks, until next time, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Roshini.
Until next time, keep it real.